So without further ado, let me introduce you to Kiran Virani, who leads product marketing efforts for our attribution team for Yelp for brands. So Kiran, take it away.
Thanks, Karisha. Can someone give me thumbs up that my audio is okay? Cool. I'm Group Product Marketing Manager for Ad Attribution at Yelp. Been 4 years here at Yelp. Work with product and sales teams to take several first-party and third-party attribution capabilities to market to meet clients' measurement needs. Now, I like that this was voted the most anticipated session. I also have quotes from Raja this morning, how hopelessly underprepared we are on the upcoming attribution changes, and from focus brands that media measurement is super critical to local campaigns too. I have a wonderful set of panelists, esteemed folks, accomplished individuals with me. Before I give the floor to each of them to introduce themselves, I'll give a primer on the session. A cookieless world is coming. It's just a matter of when and if marketers are prepared for the change. After years of relying on third-party data, marketers and advertisers are being forced to pivot to new targeting and new data collection techniques. Last-click attribution is still ubiquitously used across the industry. We'll discuss, how some of the how last-click is being challenged, and also get into what measurement strategies should marketers, either the national or local marketers, be relying on for the upcoming future. Over to you, Scott, and then we'll go to Paul and Madan.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Karan, and happy to be included in this. Excited to learn myself here. My name is Scott Symonds. I'm the General Manager, Client Services at the Trade Desk. Been in the advertising agency and platform world for 30 plus years, and probably been talking about this for 30 years. So I'm very excited to continue the conversation.
Paul, I guess you're in mute.
Sorry about that. Again, thanks for having us. It's going to be a great panel. I'm Paul Baumgarthuber. I work with LaserAway. Been with the company for 10 years now. In that time, we've grown from 12 locations to 125. And a big part of that is just how we leverage data. We're huge proponents of data, advanced attribution, and kind of getting any edge we can get leveraging that data. So glad to be here.
Madan?
I'll go next. Thank you, Karan, for having me here. My name is Madan Bharadwaj. I'm what you call an attribution guy. I've been in attribution for some 15 years, unfortunately. I'm on my 4th attribution startup. And the one that I'm doing right now, it's called M Squared. It's a marketplace for attribution education and attribution services. It's a fun panel. Look forward to the conversation, and thank you for having us here, Karan.
Thanks everyone for that intro. We'll get started right into it. The topic of today was the folly of last click. We'll definitely hit on that and then take it broader to cookieless. But let's start with last click. So last click measurement by Google Analytics or any other attribution tool is one of the favorite or go-to tools to understand performance of paid as well as organic consumer flows. So much so that I've seen marketers flaunt that as a skill on their LinkedIns as well. I would like each of your commentaries on what are some use cases where this proves out to be valuable, and where does tools like these fall short. We'll start with you, Scott, then Paul, then Madan.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, last click is a great starter metric. If you're new to category and looking to sort of steal share from category and doing only lower funnel activities like search or maybe affiliate, CRM, then it makes sense. But I think it starts to fall away quite quickly. One thing it's not good at is incrementality. Those things that have the highest click rates, branded search and retargeting, are not big incremental user drivers. You have to be very careful of that as you look to growth over just effective acquisition or efficient acquisition. And then last, some of the hottest growth channels right now, CTV, audio, out of home, don't have clicks, so it's going to be impossible to measure your growth that way. And then I'd even add that other new channels like retail have better than click. You have post-click revenue opportunity for tracking. So there's, we're in some ways we move past it to even better metrics too. The challenge obviously is getting into causality, and the advanced analytics are more challenging. But that's for up to your organization to figure out how and when the opportunity cost merits that growth opportunity. And these guys are both have some smart insights in that sort of growth pattern too.
Wow.
Definitely. I think, Scott's spot on. And from a brick and mortar perspective, it's, if you have a couple locations, you have small budgets, using that last click is very easy, doesn't require a lot of resources, directionally will, get you to kind of where you want to go. You're able to optimize towards the channels you believe are driving the most revenue for you. And typically, as a small company, you're focusing on bottom of the funnel, whether it's search, Yelp search, maybe some social. And so last click tends to work okay. But as you kind of grow and graduate into more of a national brand, you have larger budgets, you're starting to do a lot higher funnel buys like connected TV, streaming audio, maybe out of home. Again, attribution becomes a lot more difficult. And so that's kind of where the idea of implementing some sort of advanced attribution framework really becomes important.
So teeing off of what both Scott and Paul laid out for us, another way to sort of add on to that is, if you ignore the lower funnel channels, ignore SEO and search, if you consider all the mid funnel channels like Facebook and Yelp and Pinterest and TikTok and whatnot, whatever metrics you pull from Google Analytics, you can think of as your worst case performance, worst case CPA, worst case ROAS for the channel. And if you go pull reporting from the platforms themselves, from Trade Desk or Yelp or Facebook or not, they will usually overcredit themselves. You can think of as the best case performance. So what happens is these two last click paradigms kind of bound your channel efficiency, right? Now, once you understand that, you can actually make decisions with either one of those things quite effectively. As an example, let's say, for example, Yelp. You go pull Yelp reporting from Google Analytics, source medium reporting, and you find out the CPA is, for example, $85 from Google Analytics. Now you go pull Yelp's own CAPI reporting, and that says the CPA is $15, right? You might stop right there and say, my God, this is like apples and oranges. I can't make any decisions. But if you now overlay your target CPA on top of that, right? Let's say your target CPA is $100. Now the decision to scale or continue investing in Yelp is obvious. You don't really need any more information. You already have the information required to make that decision. You can make that with those two paradigms in mind. But as if your CPA target is 15 or $10, then either one of those will tell you that you're well below what you need to be, and you have to start pulling out budgets, right? That's a big part of a measurement, which is, if you think of measurement as decision support, all of a sudden you'll find that even with last click measurement, you can actually start 5 of the 10 decisions you want to make themselves. Now you can focus your energies on the 5 that really require additional inquiry, and that can be a big unlock for many organizations, which may not necessarily understand this framing that exists in the industry naturally. Let me pause right there.
I like decision support. It sounds less scary than getting deep into data analytics, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's a good point. I love how Madan, breaks it up slowly and peacefully and, piecemeal it in a way. Excellent educator. Scott, I loved your points on, how Google Analytics isn't sufficient on branded search and measuring incrementality. Now let's get into specifically how to get started. So if an organization, let's say mid to large scale organization, that's what our audience is from today, versus someone running ads for 1 or 2 locations. If an organization today has heavy dependence on last click, or their leadership has a heavy buy-in on last click, what advice would you give them on how to get started with alternative forms of measurement to understand paid media effectiveness, and how should they push the realm further with their leaders so that they can they can get more from their current data or current analytics that they're using. Let's go in the reverse order. Let's go Madan first, and then Paul, and then Scott.
Yeah, happy to. So, Paul is a great case study. I work with him on projects, a great case study on how to put it together. You don't have to eat the whole elephant in one bite. You can start small. You can start with last click, make the lower funnel channels work first, and then kind of work your way upwards, right? Kind of very classic execution that he puts together. Now, teeing up off of that, what I would say is that if you're a small brand, sub 1 million GMV, you honestly don't need advanced attribution. You can start with last click attribution. That's a fine place to start. Now, as you kind of stack up and get more sort of growth and maturity, let's say you get to $2-3 million GMV, you can start with the post-purchase survey. Now, what a post-purchase survey does is kind of anchors the a number between the web analytics and the platform attribution, gives you a number in between usually, and it's kind of what we call poor man's incrementality. It allows you to get a very quick, cheap way to kind of estimate incrementality without actually running, tests or MMMs or whatever. Allows you to get a coarse understanding. Now, the next thing you do is you take the post-purchase CPA or ROAS, you take the platform CPA and ROAS, and you calculate what's called a multiplier. Okay, let's say the Yelp post-purchase survey CPA or ROAS is like a 2. I'll say is a 4. And then the Yelp's own platform reporting is 8. So 4 over 8 is 0.5. So you get a 0.5 multiplier that really gives you an unlock. Now, every time you kind of get Yelp reporting, you use a multiplier, you can get incremental estimate for Yelp's performance on your business, right? That's a big unlock for brands, just calculating multipliers using whatever techniques. Now you can start doing, one-off lift tests, one-off geo tests, eventually get to a marketing mix model. But now you can get multipliers for 1 channel, 2 channels, 3 channels, 4 channels, and eventually fill out your entire portfolio. So the idea is start small. You don't have to eat the elephant in one bite. Start with the biggest wins, the least amount of effort you can put into it. And that allows you to kind of slowly build up to a sophisticated solution. So there's easy ways to get started is probably the quick answer.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm done. I think from a brand perspective, if last click's working, you're showing a great return. One of the scariest things for leadership is to change things, right? Because they already know it's working. So why would you want to flip it on its head and start optimizing toward top of the funnel, taking spend away from search? So that can be a really scary decision. I think the best approach is just to start with low-hanging fruit. Go to the different platforms, have them do lift tests or whatever different types of testing they have available. Most of the time they'll do it complimentary because obviously they're trying to get you to spend more money. And at least at that point, you're going to have some data. You can present it to leadership and you can show the opportunity that's available. And from there, typically, if you can show that there's potential for this incremental revenue with the same exact spend, you'll be able to get approval to test into that, right? So you're not making these huge changes at once. You're showing potential upside, you're testing into it, and then you're starting to get buy-in. And that's when you can start going down the that advanced attribution road.
Yeah, I think that's all great. It's hard to add on top of that. I think just as Paul said, sometimes people think of advertising or media as it's spending is the easy part or the main part to do, and I think data is secondary. But we know the C-suite is very worried about every dollar spent, and there is waste if you're not looking at data. So I think you have to equal weight data with advertising in terms of minimizing that waste, not to mention creating better customer experience and efficiency and growth potential. So I think taking the esoteric part out of this and making it as a first priority as any other component is sort of essential. I think also, a lot of common sense sort of things, take the common sense example of, you look at a spreadsheet, like I said before, branded search and retargeting is winning. They have the highest ROI. The CFO says, put more money in there. But you take a common sense look, hey, I heard an Athletic Greens ad on a podcast last week, and then I did a search to buy it yesterday. Well, which one is causal and which one is navigation? The podcast was more causal than the search, and you have to start thinking about how do you credit that. I mean, Madan already put a great way to start doing that. So I think part is whatever it takes to prioritize getting that data first, whether it's a common sense approach that pulls you away from your spreadsheet, or whether it's telling your CFO that actually a little bit of data investment will save you media money, then they'll start to get their attention. But from then, you just go incrementally. You create the cost benefit analysis or the value proposition. All the platforms, the walled gardens have their platforms that will help you optimize and see cross-channel value contribution. We have one that we'd like to think is more transparent, gives you more data ownership and flexibility, but these exist within the platforms. And then when you start seeing that growth opportunity and you start to see the cost benefit look good there, that's when you start getting into a third party, immediately, like we said, a big media mix model is a big undertaking. Madan has a great, stair step way up into that, if you like, but the point is to discover the value for yourself and then work your way into it, and don't eat the elephant. I'm coming back to the beginning. Don't eat the elephant all at once. It doesn't work anyways, and you spend too much and you abandon it anyway. So incrementality is the right way to go here.
Scott, that's why I love you love having you on the panels. You come back to common sense. Common sense is uncommon. I wish it was more common. Just the fact that having the common sense to hear the podcast and which one's causal. I think if everyone thought that way, Yelp's advertising revenue would probably be double. We see this all the time when folks come read reviews, read hours, read a ton of information about the business, but don't really take action at the same time, and then take a day or two or a week to take an action, and Yelp sort of loses credit. So thanks for bringing that example up. Madan, multipliers, I feel I always hear you on these multipliers. They do seem complex, but feel free to ping Madan on how do I do multipliers on LinkedIn. And then lift testing that Paul said, I think that's an excellent one. It's an opportunity to utilize. It's complementary across most of your ubiquitous channels, so there's no harm in pursuing tests that are free. Now going to first party data, I think that's something that's been brought up probably the most number of times when measurement and targeting gurus have said that when they're asked how do you prepare for the upcoming privacy changes, first party data gets brought up more often than anything else. Can you all comment on the importance of collecting and nurturing first party data as it pertains to measurement over the next 18 to 24 months? Specifically, do you agree with that, first of all? And then what investments should an organization make to achieve the same? Let's start with Paul, Scott, and then Madan.
Okay.
Sure. Again, I'm a huge proponent of data, so I think it's extremely important, especially with the deprecation of cookies, all the new privacy features, essentially interest targeting, custom audiences, all the ways we used to approach advertising is disappearing. So now it's this idea of how can we leverage our first party data to kind of get back to that place we were 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And so, I mean, in my opinion, the idea of leveraging different platforms' CAPIs is the best way to start. Feeding in as many different conversion events and data for matching will allow you to basically kind of do more broad targeting, and then allow the data that you're feeding into the platforms to kind of hone in on your perfect or your ideal audience. And at least for us, since we've been doing this, we've seen improvements in ROAS as well as CPAs now over what we were getting pre-iOS updates. And so, we can contribute pretty much all of that to the ingestion of data into their platforms.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great. Obviously, as a marketer, I'm pro first party data, and Trade Desk is a big first party data proponent. I think, there's a few ways to think about it. I think it's back to data friendliness is similar to first party data friendliness too. I think there's a couple ways to think about this. Unfortunately, sometimes first party data management and CRM and retargeting is cast as creepy, But I think, that's the wrong casting of this. It's really about respect for your customer. If you're LaserAway, I'm sure Paul has many customers that have existed for years. So the first level is making sure you just respect your customers and treat them as recurring customers. And then as a business, obviously you want to maximize their loyalty and maximize their customer experience. So, it's hugely valuable in that frame of mind. I think also, the other thing is, another great way to use first-party data is to do lookalike modeling and grow your grow your audience base by others that look like your first-party data. So that's a secondary usage. The third is back to this sort of upper funnel idea, right? We know that the lower funnel marketplaces are very competitive. You rarely will pay less than top dollar to compete at the bottom of funnel for a customer. And then also you take data like the data suggests that most brand decisions are actually made on a more emotional basis early on in the process. If you can use first-party data to both talk to existing customers and to model potential new customers and persuade them at a higher level where you can more cost-effectively reach them, then you have to pay less to battle for them at the bottom of the funnel too, if they come to you with a more, a more made decision on their brand preferences at that time. So absolute believer, absolute value proposition of any brand to build it and manage it. And again, there's a lot of tools out there that make it easier than people think. There's another area that's clouded with, it's complex. I have to get a bunch of third parties. We have a tool called Galileo. It makes it very easy to upload first-party data and hash it for identity and usage and activation. Again, all the platforms do. So there are tools out there to do this because it's valuable and the marketplace has seen how to help make value from that data.
Yeah, so I'll take a slightly different angle. There are two sort of perspectives here. One is activation, one is measurement, right? Using first-party data to upload them, activate them. I think it's very clear how CAPI helps and how targeting helps and all that stuff. So from a measurement perspective, I think what might be useful to understand is that when Paul talks about advanced attribution, there's only two causal attribution techniques in market that are truly causal, that is actually proven in the market. One is marketing mix modeling, one is incrementality testing, okay? Now, or more specifically, geo match market incrementality testing. Those are the two gold standards of advanced attribution-based measurement, okay? Now, both of those rely on first-party data. You are essentially using source of truth transaction data about your business to understand lift in specific markets or use that to build marketing mix models. It turns out that the kind of data you need to build these models is fairly straightforward and fairly accessible. Now, if you're a Shopify sort of shop or any e-commerce platform, the data that comes out of the box in most of these platforms can support marketing mix modeling and can support geo-testing, right? So for the most part, you don't need to put in a lot of infrastructure for measurement. The infrastructure you already have probably supports your measurement needs going forward. The biggest thing that you can do is put in multipliers and build the analytics muscle to be able to triangulate decisions. Now, we talked about the best case, worst case, and triangulating to a decision. That is the most important muscle you have to build as an organization to be able to navigate attribution in the medium term. Let's call it next 3, 4, 5 years. If you build that muscle internally, I think you should be able to use all the data streaming at you effectively to make decisions. You start there, you start with multiplier-based simple worksheets on multipliers. You go a long way. You can kind of buy yourself a good 6 months to a year's worth of room for you to optimize your media and take small steps. Can go a long way here.
Thanks, folks. This was really helpful getting your takes on first-party data. Paul, you mentioned Conversions API as being helpful over the past few years. Can you walk us, first of all, I think it will be helpful for the audience if you can define what Conversions APIs are. And then, how did you get started? You did say that you realized a good ROI. It's better than it was pre-IDFA, but I think it would make sense to give audience a taste of how easy to difficult it is to get a tool like Conversions API stood up.
Sure. Again, yeah, you're right. It doesn't have to be difficult. There's many platforms out there, a lot of different CDPs that will automatically connect to their API, send data, either event-based or daily, whichever you prefer. But the important part is to make sure that the data you are sending is accurate and clean, right? Because if you're sending incorrect data, it's kind of defeats the purpose of sending first-party data to a conversion API. I would say the easiest one to stand up is Meta. And they kind of are the pioneers in the space. They have a lot of different resources to be able to send them the data for analysis and for matching. So as a brand, that's probably the first place I would start. I would actually look at our most effective channels first, because obviously Google has a conversion API, Snap, TikTok. And so I would rank stack them from your most effective to least effective, and then just kind of work through the list, whether that's using a CDP or getting some data engineers in-house, whatever your resources allow you to do. But I would definitely start with your big platforms, load in some historical data, and then every day continuously load in data and just monitor performance. Make some notations of when you started your conversion API, and then thereafter just look back and see how it impacts your returns, how it impacts your CPAs, and then if there's any additional data that you can provide them to improve the targeting and optimization.
Thanks, Paul. Seems like the takeaway here is read more about conversions APIs, utilize conversions APIs that has been made available by either publishers, and definitely have the conversations about getting a conversions API stood up with your CDP or CRM that you work with.
Yep.
Scott, moving to the trade desk and programmatic world for about 3 to 5 minutes. You are a leader, and Trade Desk is a market leader in providing infrastructure for programmatic buying, programmatic media buying. Can you tell us about, and I think Raja also alluded to that, Raja, the CMO of MasterCard, in our first session today, he alluded to the fact that Trade Desk is doing some commendable work on the cookieless world. So can you tell us about Trade Desk efforts in measuring media and making sure it stays relevant in the changing privacy landscape?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you brought privacy in too, because I think this sort of sums everything we talked about together. We talked already about clicks being a good starter, but not being a good long-term solution to measure the emerging channels. Obviously, the programmatic world now includes CTV and out-of-home and sports events and audio and all of these sorts of things. So we need to build a world where we can measure all that. In a click-based world or a cookie-based world, neither of those things work. And then we also believe in a more permission-based identity world. And so all those things come together in something we call UID 2.0. It's actually an open source industry solution, but it's meant to be a more persistent post-cookie identity solution with more opt-in control from users. And it also gives more fidelity of user tracking at the household and device level, which cookies sort of cannot do. So that is our solution for being sort of both more respectful from a permission-based world, but then also being able to deliver a solution that now, by the way, can look at the frequency accumulation from a CTV event to an audio event to a display event and give you that multi-touch attribution. And also, again, back to the consumer respect, also make sure that we're not stacking a 75 frequency on a consumer, which is a bad experience for the consumer and wasteful for the advertiser, right? So a lot of the value proposition of this too becomes efficiency. We find, one of the greatest uses of using UID and using a platform like Trade Desk is to be mindful of that, to control for frequency, save that excess frequency on too few people and reapply it into reach, which is how you actually get growth in the marketplace. And again, I want to bring back to sort of a practical reality. I think we found that we talk about cookie deprecation, replacing cookie, and is it fall next year? Everybody puts it off. But I would rather, and I also don't like to have the drama of the whole world's going to end if you don't do these sorts of things. But what I do want to say is smart advertisers are doing it now. UID exists. We're getting a lot of big publishers and big advertisers. Paramount's using it, Disney's using it, Unilever's using it. They're already actually finding more of their first-party data been able to activate it than using previous identifiers. So the opportunity exists now. My suggestion would be to start experimenting with these things. And if you need a fear tactic, then others are doing it now. You don't want to be the last. I think Paul and LaserAway has done well by being data literate and being agile. And I think you have to challenge yourself, to not be the last in line for that sort of thing. I think the history in sort of marketing the last 20 years is the more data literate and more agile have won and been disruptors of some of the larger enterprises. And I think that's why we see the lean in that we do right now from the Unilevers and Procter and Gamble's on this. So the main takeaway I want to say is, there is a better privacy-centric solution, opt-in solution, and also multi-channel solution that's UID. We encourage people to test it out. We're seeing buy-in, and that's sort of what we think is a great enabler of more programmatic effectiveness and efficiency going forward.
Thanks, Scott. Really excited to hear Trade Desk efforts on UID. I hope folks who are in the programmatic world and do this on a daily basis are thinking about UID and how do they get their data to connect with UID. So thanks for commenting on that. I have one last question for this panel, specifically for Madan, and then we can get into questions. Madan, you are the expert when it comes to advocating and for advanced attribution, really at the top of the hill. Haven't really seen anyone else, but you are there. What's the best way? You kind of talked about multiple techniques, multipliers, incrementality, audience testing. It can be, as a marketer myself, it can be overwhelming, when you hear all these together. What's the best way for a marketer to get started with learning more about advanced attribution?
Come take my class, Well, jokes apart, I would say that it's a big challenge, right? There is a lot of noise in the industry about attribution. A lot of the content is vendor content, right? Vendors advocating for their approaches and techniques. And it's a little bit like trying to learn about cars in a Lexus showroom, right? So you can't really learn about cars by reading brochures from Lexus and BMW. You got to go take an automobile engineering class, right? And there's nothing like that for attribution today, which was the impetus for me to go start M Squared and create a body of knowledge that's truly unbiased and high integrity and academic quality integrity that folks can consume, right? Anyway, minus the plug for my class. What I would say is that there's a mental model for attribution. If you carry that as marketers, it's much easier to absorb information and make it more actionable for you. The mental model is that there are two types of attribution. One is called base attribution, one's called advanced attribution. Now, base attribution is all the last click stuff. It could be Google Analytics, could be platform attribution, could all the forms of last click kind of fall into what I call base attribution. Advanced attribution or causal attribution, there's only two types. One is marketing mix modeling, second is incrementality testing, okay? Now, the important thing to note is the base attribution techniques are usually streaming data. Like, you can get it hourly, daily, it's kind of streaming data. But as all advanced attribution today is episodic, right? Even marketing mix modeling, you can probably get quarterly, even monthly reads, but even at that point, it's episodic, right? So you need this multipliers concept to connect the two. And that way we can get incremental streaming reporting, daily reporting that's incremental or causal, right? That's kind of the unlock for marketers. Now, having this mental model in place, if you go read a blog post on multi-touch attribution or incrementality testing or marketing mix or whatever, you know where it falls, and it's much easier to absorb all these techniques that people are talking about. So that's one most important thing. Second important concept that marketers want to take away is that you are truly a snowflake. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. It's almost impossible. I know I've done 1,000 projects right now. It's impossible to just get a third-party vendor, stick them in your organization, assume that you've solved it. That's not going to work. Tools are probably 30% of the solution. The practice of like using data in a way to make data-driven decisions, it's 70% of the solution, right? So that's putting those two things together is really what's going to solve your attribution problem statement for you. And that's what you need to work on, right? It's most likely going to be a lot of in-housing of work that you have to do. Now take those two big concepts, the base advanced attribution and the fact that, 30% tools, 70% practice, in-house practice. You take this kind of framework, now you can go read blog posts, stuff like that, or come take my class and happily teach attribution.
Thanks, Madan, for that really detailed answer. We actually had a question as well. What can you please summarize what the perfect advanced attribution model looks like without cookies and emerging technologies like AI? But I guess, is there anything to add there, or
No, so that's the framework. The framework, advanced attribution is really about two things: marketing mix modeling and incrementality testing. Those are the two things. And how you put that together, I mean, that's the art of using multipliers. How do you stack them on top of each other so that it turns into a solution for you, is really the solution architecture work that's very bespoke for everybody. It's not like something that works the same way for everybody, and you have to put the elbow grease in figuring out how this tool works in your context. Like as an example, marketing mix models can be a really almost a source of truth for certain brands for causal measurement. For others, it's only a directional measurement, right? It can just be broadly sort of a point you in some right directions, but you have to do a lot of testing to unlock that true incrementality of channels, right? Now, exactly how much of a role each one can play and what kind of tests you can use in your specific media mix, those are all things that has to be figured out on a case-by-case basis.
And I would say, sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the hardest things too is building the new institutional muscle of patience in reporting for the episodic phase, right? Yeah. I think we're also addicted to the real-time dashboards, and again, I think almost too much has been made of that. Not to downplay real-time data, but to the extent that the episodic, causal, larger, advanced analytics are valuable, and they are. It takes patience, and that's something that we don't often see, to have a week or monthly cadence for those sorts of things. So I don't know how you fit that in your institutional learning, but that's part of the training here.
It's a great point. It's a great point, Scott. There is a requirement to be patient and also have like a little bit of a vision, right? If you are looking ahead 6 months, this is probably something you can solve. If you're looking for something next week, well, you've got to take a more heuristic approach to things. So.
Cool. We just have 1 minute. So we'll take one more question. How would you overcome restrictions on utilization of first-party data in platforms such as Google Ads due to business falling within a sensitive category? So like a healthcare business would be a good example where HIPAA applies and you are probably not able to share sensitive patient information into the publisher's platform. Any thoughts there before we wrap?
I think a lot of it, because with LaserAway, we are kind of in that sensitive category. And a lot of it has to come down to just best data privacy practices as far as hashing, using clean rooms. I know Scott can definitely speak to this, as they have a really good solution for this type of concern when it comes to sending advertisers sensitive data. But it's really just kind of being cognizant of and respectful of what you're doing with that data and making sure that you're verifying that it's in compliance before you do anything, before you're sending it off to a platform.
Oh, simple but effective. Thanks, Paul, for that take. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks to the panel, Paul, Madan, Scott. Always nice to have a conversation with you. I hope this audience had takeaways on what are some of the best practices in measuring media,